Welcome to 3D Printing, Software Settings for Successful Prints for Beginners, presented by the Mount Royal University Library Maker Studio. In this video, you will learn how to set up a 3D model for printing in Ultimaker Cura, which is a free 3D printing software. For more project ideas, resources, and information, you can go to the Maker Studio website, which is found on the Mount Royal University Library website under Spaces.
In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that the Mount Royal University is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, and the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda nations, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta.
This workshop will discuss the purpose of 3D printing or slicing software and software availability, demonstrate proper use of the tools and settings in a 3D printing software to successfully set up a 3D model for printing, and explain how to send a prepared 3D model to a 3D printer. At the end of this workshop, participants should be able to understand the function of 3D printing software and identify which software to use depending on the 3D printer, and properly use a 3D printing software settings and tools to prepare a 3D print for printing. The purpose of 3D printing or slicing software is to transform your 3D model into G-code by slicing it into layers. It also adjusts the 3D printer settings, and you can change those settings to what's appropriate for your model. Remember, while having a 3D model is the first step in creating a 3D print, how you adjust your settings in the 3D print software will determine the outcome of your physical print. Each model will have its own unique needs and require different settings. In the Maker Studio, we have a variety of different kinds of printers and a variety of different 3D printing software that we use for them. Some of the printers have proprietary software, so you can only use that software with that machine. Some of them are open source. We have MakerBot Print, Preform, Prusa Slicer, and Ultimaker Cura for printing software that we use. Okay, so we're going to open up Ultimaker Cura and get started setting up some models. If you'd like to follow along with the same models that we will be using today, you can go to this website and download both the STL-CAT files, and then you can follow along. Okay, so here we are in Ultimaker Cura. So when you first download the software, it's going to ask you which kind of printer you have. So I'm just going to go here and go to Add Printer so you can see what it'll look like. So we don't have a printer hooked up to our network or to our computer. So what we're going to do is go to Add a non-networked printer. So if I click on this, and then you'll see a list of a bunch of different printers from different brands. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose Prusa because that's one of the printers that the Maker Studio has. So we're just going to go down here, find Prusa, and there it is, Prusa 3D. So if I click on here, I'll find the exact model that we have, and that's this one. And then I'm going to say Add, but I already have this one in my Ultimaker Cura, so I'm not going to click Add, but imagine that I did. And then I'm going to go over here, so it would show up here. And I have a few different ones here because you can have a bunch of different ones. This is the printer I have at home, the Creality Ender 3 Pro. So if I click on that, you can see this is exactly what my bed plate, this is the size of my bed plate, and this is the print build area. So if I go back up here to the Prusa, this is the size of the Prusa's build plate. So that's really handy. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go over the interface, the tool, and the print settings. Okay, so to save your project, which is, you should do that, is you go up to File, and then Save Project. And save. And then you save it where you want. And I'm just going to call mine Tutorial because I've already saved it. There we go. Done. So it's all nice and saved. Okay, so let's go to the interface and we'll do a little overview of it. So most 3D printing softwares have very similar interfaces. Once you're familiar with one of them, it's easier to use the rest, and Cura is pretty good. So what we're going to do, we've already know how to save, so we're actually going to open files. So this is what you use to import the STL or OBJ or whatever 3D model you have into Ultimaker Cura. So let's click on that now and bring in our STL. So hopefully you downloaded from the link that I gave you earlier these two cat STLs. I'm just going to hold shift and select them both and put them in at the same time. There they are. Okay, and next we have the printer selection panel, which displays the selected printer. We've already spoken about that. And here we have the configuration panel. This contains the material and print core setup. So if I click on this, you can see the material I have chosen is PLA. It's just generic. So if I go under generic, I get this drop down of all the different types of filament that I could be using. So I have PLA selected here, but if I had a specific brand, I could go to that, like let's say eSun, and then I choose PLA, and I could pick purple, and then I have the settings for that specific filament, but I'm just going to go to, for today, to generic PLA. Okay, and then up here are the stages. So we don't usually use monitor, but what we're going to do today is look at prepare, and that's to see what your model looks like in the first place when you bring it in. And preview is when you've got all the settings that you want. What you'll do is you'll click preview and then you'll slice it. So when you do that, the software is turning your model into G-code, and then it gives you a preview of exactly what it'll look like once it's printed. So this is how it's going to look with the exact settings I have right now. And you can see the reason it looks like this is because there's this little slide bar here, the slide bar, and if I go up all the way, there we go. So it's saying it's going to take 881 layers to make this print. And if I scroll down, I can actually look at every single layer. This is handy because if your print fails, you can come in here and take a look at where it failed and why. Another really useful thing is this little bar here. So if I hit play, this is a simulation of the nozzle on this exact layer. So it's showing me exactly what the printer is going to be doing. So if it did fail, it's really helpful to see this. Just gonna pause here. Okay, up here is the print settings panel, and we'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute. Down here we have the action panel. So it contains an action button depending on the current stage. So right now, because I've sliced it, it's telling me it's going to take 6 hours and 50 minutes to print this model, and it'll take 39 grams of filament. And it's saying save to file because I don't have an SD card in my computer right now, so it's going to save it to a file on my computer. But if I had an SD card in the computer, it would say save to a removable drive. And if I had it hooked up, it would just say send to printer. So let's go back to prepare. There we go. And you can see now it's saying, do you want to preview it? Over here, we have the camera positioning tools. These are like little shortcuts for views. So I can go to like a home view. I can do a front view, top view. I think that's the left and this is the right. And then this is the model information. So there's a list of objects. So that's the two files that we have there. And then this is the file name and the size. All right, let's talk about viewing models in Cura and how to do that. So first of all, let's talk about orbiting. So if I hold down the right mouse button and I drag, that's how you orbit. If I want to pan, I would push down on the mouse wheel and drag. And to zoom, you roll the mouse wheel. Okay, it's time to start talking about the adjustment tools. You use the tools to change your models, and to undo what you've done, you can hit Ctrl-Z or Command-Z if you have a Mac to bring them back. When your model is selected, the tools on the left become available. There you go. You can see they were grayed out and now they're available. And if you select more than one model at a time, you can adjust them simultaneously. So if I have this one selected, I just have to hold Shift and then I can select the other one and move them both at the same time. So the first tool we're going to talk about is the Move tool. So if I select one of these models, you can see this is the Move tool here. And there are three ways to move it. One is the number input field, which is this. One is just clicking and dragging the 3D model, and the other one is the arrow handles. So for the number input field, that's if I wanted to move this cat exactly, 10 millimeters on its y-axis, I can just put in 10 here and hit enter and it'll move over. If I wanted to move it back, I can hit -10 and enter, and there it moves back to where it was. You can also lock your model so that it can't move. There we go. The second way to move your model around is just by clicking and dragging the model. And you can watch as I do it, the number input fields change. And the third way is the arrow handles. So that's what these arrows are. And you can see the colors match up with the axis. So the blue one is the Z axis, and the green one is the Y, and the red is the X. So if I click and drag on the blue, I can bring it up or down. In my settings, I have it set so it should snap to the build plate if it's over top of it. Okay, so the next tool we're going to use is the Scale tool, and that's this one here. The Scale tool allows the model to be scaled in three different ways, again in millimeters, as a percentage, and with the handles again. So if I wanted this cat to be a little larger, I can enter a number into the input field. So I could change this one to 100 millimeters, and there we go. And I've done it on its x-axis, but because I have uniform scaling selected, everything will, all the proportions will change in a consistent way because of the uniform scaling being selected. If I don't select this, and let's say I turn this to 150, it's only going to scale on its x-axis, okay? So the next way to change the scale is the percentage input field. And so let's say right now it's saying that this model is 174.37% instead of 100, which it would have been 100% of the size of the model when I brought it in. So if I change this back to 100, there we go. It's a little skinnier, but if you look here, I don't have uniform scaling. So if I change all of these to 100, it's exactly the size that it was when I inputted it, or when I brought it in. So I'm just going to select uniform scaling now. If I grab these handles, I can change the size as well. If I don't have uniform scaling selected and I grab the handles, you can see it's only getting taller, or it's scaling on the Z-axis. All right, so this button is your reset button. It's very handy. Brings it back to its original size. And then we have snap scaling. This option, if you have it selected, will scale the model by 10% at a time when you're dragging on the scale handles. So if I drag this, it's changing at 10% at a time. You can watch it in the percent input field, how it's changing by 10%. Okay, the next tool we're going to talk about is the Rotate tool. So the Rotate tool allows the model to be rotated on all of its axes. This is particularly useful to reduce the amount of support needed, or to increase the model's footprint for better build plate adhesion. We're going to talk about supports and build plate adhesion in a minute, but let's take a look at these two models. They're very different. So if I am printing this one, at the moment, the way it's sitting now, it's going to need support material. You can see that it's red here, and that's the software saying that in the parameters you've set, which I'll show you in a bit, it's going to need support material here. And if I go to preview mode and then I slice it, hold on, let's bring that back up. You can see that indeed it does. This is all support material, right? So this model is going to cost a little bit more because it needs more filament and there could be scarring here. And if you have the ability or the option to print your model with no supports, you should do that. So we can. So what I'm going to do is go back to the prepare view. And I know that this CAD has 2 flat sides, right? So if I can have it lay on this side, it shouldn't need any support. So let's see if we can do that with the tools. So let's do the lay flat. So we have these icons here. This one is to reset it. It's already where it was, so it won't change. I'll show you in a minute. This one is the lay flat tool. So what it does is, and I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. Whatever face is closest to the build plate, what it'll do is lay that face onto the build plate. So if I printed this like this, it's going to have tons of supports here. So if I click on this though, oh, I guess the bottom one was the closest one. So hold on, let's try again. There we go. See, and it laid flat. That's really handy to help you save. I'm just going to move this out of the way a little bit. There we go. To help you save on filament and things like that and scarring. So I'm just going to reset it. All right, so this one, this will actually align your model or the face that you choose to the build plate. So if I choose this and then I choose this face, it'll just pop it right down. I'm just going to hit reset. Let's say I actually chose this face. See, the face I chose, it put it flat down onto the build plate. It's a very handy tool. So let's put that back up. But what I want to do is have it lay flat on this one. So I'm going to select this one again and have it, oops, I think I lost it there. And there we go. Now here, this is good. The reason that it looks striped is because you can see it's out of the build plate area. So what we're going to do is just click it, oops, on the move tool and then move it back in and it goes back to being yellow. All right, so the snap rotation, just like with the scale one, will rotate in intervals of 15% when you're using the rotate hoops. So let's use the rotate hoops now. You can see that the colors are the same for the axes. We've got Z, X, and Y. So if I grab this one, I can actually just turn it, click and drag, and there we go. Or I can do this one. So if I click on the snap rotation, it will move it in degrees, 15-degree increments. All right, so let's reset it and then have it lay flat. There we go. Now, let's move on to the next tool. This is the mirror tool. So the mirror tool lets you mirror your model on all 3 axes. So you just have to click on the axes or the arrow that you want and it'll flip it. That's nice and easy. There we go. And this is the per model settings. The per model settings feature is only available when the print settings panel is set to custom mode. So that's just up here. I'll show you that in more detail in a minute, but this is the recommended mode and this is the custom mode, which is what I have it on. Okay, the feature provides the ability to have multiple models in Ultimaker Cura with a different printing strategy on the same build plate. So this allows for easy printing of batch models for different purposes. So the idea is that when we start to get into the print settings, I could just choose one model and have that model be support material. I could have it have a separate infill, and you can actually change the settings for this. I could go here and I could select different settings and change it just for that model, which is pretty cool. And I could also have it so any overhangs don't have any support. So I could do that if I wanted to. So like maybe I have a bunch of different models that I want to print, but 2 of them can print without any supports, and 2 of them need supports. So I might select the ones that don't need supports and choose this, even though there might be some overhangs, but I know because I've printed it before that it'll print fine the way it is. I could choose that. All right, so let's take a look here. This is the support blocker. Oh, I need to change this back. There we go. And again, like in this one, you can change all the settings. Anything you wanted to change, you could add to here. And I'll get into that in a minute. I know you don't know what the settings are yet, but we'll be talking about that in just a sec. So down here, this is the support blocker tool. So the support blocker tool allows you to choose an area of your model you would like to avoid having supports. So you just select it and then you click anywhere on your model. And the neat thing about the support blocker tool is it gives you this block. If I click off it, I can just choose the block, and you can modify the block the same way you can modify your model, like with these tools. So I can go to the move tool and I can move it over a little bit, and maybe it's not big enough, so I can select the scale tool and I can make it a little bigger. And the reason you would use this tool is, let's say you have like a small model and you know there's an area on it that doesn't need supports, and you know that if you have supports they'll be difficult to remove, or maybe it'll cause scarring on a face or an area you don't want, anything like that. So you can actually have it not put any supports on the area that's in this cube. So if I slice this now and go to the preview, there we go. So you can see there's no supports going onto this cat's face at all. So if I select the support blocker and I delete it and I slice it again, you can see all of these supports now appear. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the print settings. All right, that's just up here. So in Cura, there are 2 modes available. There's the recommended mode, that's this one, and you can just click this button here to go to the custom mode. So recommended mode is perfect for beginners, while the custom mode offers more settings for experienced users. So here, these are the most frequently used settings. There are more options that you can use to fine-tune your print under the custom mode, but understanding these ones is a good first step. So the settings in the print settings panel under custom shows some of the basic options, but if you click on the settings icon, so that's this little gear here, it will show you a lot more options to choose from. And when you hover over each of the options, a definition will appear. So you can see if I hover over this, there we go. So I'm going to X out of here. If you can see here, it says quality, and layer height is usually the default one under here. So I can change the layer height if I wanted to. But if I click on the little gear, it actually under quality will give me all of these settings. And if I keep going down, you can see here's shell, which is here. So this is all of the settings, but it just brings you to the one that you opened up with your little gear. So maybe I want to change the support line width. If I select that, now it'll also appear here, and I can edit it. So these are the options, and if you want them to appear underneath these settings, you need to have a check beside it, and then it'll show up. So I'm going to close that. So let's talk a little bit about layer height, which is very important. So layer height is the height of each layer, obviously, right? But this one is 0.1 millimeters, which is 100 microns. So that means that each of these layers is 0.1 millimeters. Now, the more layers you have, the thinner your layers, the better your resolution will be on your print, but the longer it will take. So you can see here, it's 6 hours and 14 minutes. And if I change this to 2. So 200 microns, and then I slice it. Now it's 3 hours and 12 minutes, right? That makes sense. It's like half the time. So if the resolution is really important to you, if you're printing something that has something with detail and you really need to see that, I would print it at 0.1 or 0.15 to really get that detail. But if you're printing something like this cat, it doesn't really have a lot of detail. It's just flat. So I would probably actually print it at 0.2. It would be a lot faster, and there's no real reason for it to be printed at a fine resolution like that. So that actually brings me up to this profile setting up here. So if I click down on here, these are profiles that Ultimaker Cura has set for this particular printer. Okay, so they're saying here, like, a draft mode is 0.2 millimeters. That's what I've got. So if you had a prototype and you just wanted a quick draft, 0.2 millimeters is great for that. You can test out your prototype and see how it works. If you want normal, they're saying 0.15 millimeters for the layer height is good for like a nice normal average print. And then fine is 0.1 and extra fine is 0.06. So it depends on the printer you're using, but these numbers will change, and it has to do with the step motor and things like that, but it's a really good idea to take a look at these numbers and use them for your layer height. All right, so, and another thing is with the profile is you could change all these settings and have them perfect for a certain type of model. Then you can save your profile, and then you can even share that profile with someone else. You can download it or export it and then send it to someone. So if you have some settings that work really well with a specific kind of model, you can save them and then bring them back up, so you don't have to change all these settings every time you have that model. Okay, so here we go. The next thing we're going to talk about is the shell. So let's drop that down. You can see there's a lot of default things to change with it. So an average wall count is 2. So I'm just going to zoom in here so you can take a look, and you see there's 2 walls. Okay, so that's pretty normal for 3D printing. If you need it to be thicker, you can change this number, have it be 3. I wouldn't recommend anything less than 2 unless it's really specific for the kind of model you have, because it's going to be a really weak print. You can also change the top and bottom thickness of your shell, and maybe that's really important for the type of model you have. So you can sense a theme here that it's important to choose your settings for the model that you're printing. There isn't really like default settings for every single 3D print. All right, so let's take a look here quickly at all the settings for your shell. That's all of this. There's a lot of things that you can change. All right, and now let's look at infill. So infill is this. So when your model's done, it's going to look like this, but on the inside, and this is for FDM printing, not SLA printing, the inside looks like this. But you can change that. So this is set at 20%, which is kind of a lot for this type of model, and the pattern is grid, and you can see the grid. But if I was only going to use this cat as like a decoration or something, it doesn't need to have this much infill, and the more infill you have, like the sturdier it is, but the more filament you're going to use. So if I was just going to have it as like, you know, like a thing that's going to sit on my desk, I would actually change this maybe to 10%. And then I would probably change this to, I don't know, just for fun, let's change it to cubic. And then I hit slice. There we go. So you can see that there's less, the spaces in between are bigger, and the pattern has changed. Okay, now let's move on to material. So if I open up material, it's giving me the option to change the printing temperature, which is really important, and the build plate temperature. So different material melt at different temperatures. So it's saying to me 200 degrees for the PLA. So I'm going to say no. So when you buy PLA, it probably will say on it, print at temperatures between 200 degrees and 240, which I find hilarious because that's a huge difference. So what I normally do is I default for PLA at 210 degrees Celsius if it gets too stringy. So when the nozzle is traveling from one part to another part of the model, and if it leaves a string, it's too hot. So I'll change the temperature while it's printing, and you can do that with most printers. You can see here though it's giving me this little message saying this is normally calculated, but you can change it if you want to. So if I click on this, it'll go back to being 200. But I think 210 is probably fine. And then the build plate temperature is the temperature of the build plate. So that's really handy. If you have a printer that heats up the build plate, it really helps to keep the first few layers stuck to the build plate, which is important because, again, if the first few layers don't work, if they fail, your model will fail. You always have to have a layer underneath the next layer for it to succeed. So 60 degrees is good. Sometimes it depends on the material you're using. So like I've done experiments with wood, with filament that has wood in it, like wood powder, and I had this at 0. Like it didn't work otherwise. So it depends on what you're doing, and might have to experiment or look up online different forums of other people who have used what you're using and go from there. If I hit the little grid, here are all the options of things that I can change, and there's a lot of different temperature changing things that I can pick that really help you get the print that you want. Okay, so let's talk about speed. So the print speed defines the speed in millimeters at which the print head moves while printing. So a higher speed will lead to a shorter print time, but it doesn't always work out if you have a higher speed. Sometimes it's better if it's slower, especially for the initial layer. So quite often I will put in the initial layer speed option, and I will actually make this a little slower. So only if it doesn't work. So let's say I start my print and it does the first few layers, but the layers aren't sticking. The filament isn't sticking. The first thing I will do is I will slow down the initial print layer speed to even like half so that it goes nice and slow and I know it's going to stick. All right, so let's talk a little more about one sec. All right, we're going to talk about travel. Here we go. So if I open this one up, I always click on enable retraction, and what that means is that it will actually like kind of suck the filament back into the nozzle when it has to travel from one part of your model to another. And if we look at these, there's lots of different options that you can choose. All right, and cooling. Cooling is another setting that that's really handy for making sure your first few layers stick. So the fan speed, this is at 100, and we're saying yes, enable print cooling. It's important because when your filament comes out of the nozzle, it's very hot. So you want it to cool down really quickly and stay at the shape that it comes out of the nozzle. So if I click on here though, I can actually make the fan go slower for the initial layers. So I can change all of that, which is helpful. So that's another thing I do if the first few layers aren't sticking very well, is I will slow it down, and then I will also slow down the fan so that it stays a little melty for the first little bit and sticks to the next layer. Okay, so support material is very important. So we've chosen yes, generate support. If I unclick that, it won't put any support at all, and then all the options disappear. But I'm saying support everywhere. I could just say touching the build plate, so no supports will go off the model to another area of the model. and the support overhang angle. So that's saying that anything that is 50 degrees or more, oh, you can see it here, will have supports. So if this number is 90 degrees, it won't have any supports at all. And I change this all the time. Usually the minimum I do is 45 degrees, and depending on what the print looks like, I'll even go upwards to like 65 or 70 degrees if it's something that doesn't have large overhangs. And that'll change your support. So you remember that this had this little red mark, and if I turn this to 90 degrees and then I slice it, oh, it actually did it. No red marks. So it's not going to print any supports at all. But if I make this, oh, and it's orange because it's telling me it might be a bad idea. Maybe reset that. So there we are at 50% again. Okay, and the settings for support, there are lots, and it's a good idea to take a look at these ones because so supports for default for Cura will have a wall around them to help them, be sturdy. And if you don't need that, you can actually change your support wall line count. There, that is. So it's 0 right now, but if it was like 1 or 2, you might want to change that to 0. Unless the supports, it's really important that they're really sturdy. Uses a lot more filament though. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the build plate adhesion. Can't stress how important it is to make sure that your first layers stick. In fact, they have a whole setting for it, right? All right, so there are 3 kinds of build plate adhesion types. So what we have here is brim. That's the first thing selected here. So I'm going to hit slice so we can take a look at that and go to preview. All right, so you can see each of these lines is part of the brim, and it doesn't actually go under the model. It just attaches to the wall of it. So if you're printing something tall and skinny, a brim is great because it'll help it stay sturdy on the bottom. Okay, and you can change how your brim looks. So if I go to the settings, I can see there's like brim width, brim line count, brim distance. There's tons of stuff. Do you want brim to replace supports? Do you want brim for your supports? Like there's so many different settings you can do. So if I look here, my width is 8 millimeters and it's 20, this is 20 lines. So I could change that. If I know that the model's not going to need that much, I can change that to 10. And then I slice again. There we go. You can see it's much thinner and it's only 10 lines. All right, so let's change the brim. We're not going to use a brim now, we're going to use a skirt. So let's slice that and see what that looks like. All right, so this line is actually the skirt. What a skirt does, it doesn't help your model stick at all. Well, I guess it does in a way. What it's doing is clearing out the filament that's inside the nozzle from your previous print, and it's getting it all out of there. So to make sure that the filament that you're going to have for your model is really good. There's no little bit stuck in there, because sometimes your nozzle can get clogged up if you're using, let's say your previous print you used PETG, which has a higher melting point, and then the next one you're going to do is PLA, which has a lower melting point. So you might still have little chunks of PETG stuck inside your nozzle, and having a brim helps to have like everything run out, everything clear up. So this is 1, it looks like there's 1 here. So if I click on the settings, I can change the skirt line count and the skirt distance, how far it is from the model. So let's take a look at that. So it's saying there's 1. So if I change that to, let's say 3, and it's only 3 millimeters for my model, I don't really want that. Let's make it 6. And then I slice it. There you go. So now there's 3 and it's a little farther away. Okay, so the next build plate adhesion type is raft. So let's slice that. Now, what a raft does is it, this one is outside the build plate. There we go. Slice that again. There. You can see it's actually going out a little farther. So what the raft does is it provides a surface which will stick to the build plate really well and also stick to your model really well. So you can see like on this cat, it has all of these supports. So it's kind of important for it to have a good surface to stick to. Otherwise the supports might not work. They might not stay, they'll fail. So a raft is really handy for that. The bad thing about a raft is this is all garbage afterwards, just like the supports. You just peel it off and put it in the garbage. So if I do need to use a raft, if no matter what I try, it's not sticking. The supports aren't staying on. Everything is not working. I'll use a raft, but I wouldn't use one so wide. So what I would do is I would go to the settings and I would find their raft extra margin. I would select that one. Air gap is just like the spaces in between each of the raft lines. And you can do all these different things to change what your raft looks like, but I'm just going to make it's saying 15 millimeters from the model, right? That's a lot. So I'm going to change it to 7 and then slice it. There, that's probably better for these models. The reason you would want a larger raft from your model, like that 15 millimeter one, is if you are printing something really big, like it has a wide bottom, what can happen is as the nozzle is going all the way around, the filament cools off so much that it starts to peel back when it gets the second layer on it, because the layer is hot. And when that layer starts to cool, it actually starts to contract and pull. So the corners come up. So if you make your raft a lot wider, it can help to keep it down and attach to the build plate. All right. And that's it for the build plate adhesion types. And then dual extrusion is if you have a machine that has 2 extruders, which we don't really have in the Maker Studio. So remember that the settings that we have discussed and used are different for each model that come in. So it's important. Again, I know I've already said this, but you have to, like, let's say if I had this cat, I would have all the perfect settings for it. I might make a profile for flat prints, like nice, easy flat prints, done. Save a profile for that. Call it nice, easy flat prints. And then for this cat, let's talk about him a little bit. So for his orientation, I would probably leave him the way he is, because if I rotate him up a little bit so that his face doesn't have any supports, his tail is really long and it's going to create a lot of support material. Right, that's more support material, and it's going to leave scarring exactly the way it was before, except for just here on his face. So I'm just going to reset him. So what I would probably do with this cat is I would leave this orientation exactly the same, so that all the support scarring is on the bottom, nothing's on the top, where you'll see, that's where you normally see, and I would probably put a support blocker on his face if I knew that this angle wasn't going to cause any failure. And it looks like it's okay. I think that should probably be fine. Each layer can still sit on the next one okay. So I'd probably put a support blocker here and then print the rest just like this. Okay, now let's say we have all the settings ready for our models and we're ready to print it. Click on slice. Okay, and then you would send this to your printer. You could do that by saving it to an SD card and then putting the SD card into your printer, or you could plug your machine directly into your computer and send it that way. If you don't want to print your file yet, but you want to save it, you can just do what we did earlier and save or file and then save project. If you'd like to export it, you could go to export and you can see here that you can change it to an STL or an OBJ. If you have further questions, you can contact the Maker Studio at makerstudio@mtroyal.ca, or you can email the Maker Studio staff.